Great. Can you all see my screen and when I go back and forth between slides? Cool. Awesome. So this morning we're gonna, or morning, wow, this afternoon, we just had lunch. We are going to go over 3 enumerables that some of you I saw throughout going over your projects that I think some of you started implementing. This is something we haven't gone over yet, so I do want to go over some 3 common enumerables that you might see and that you might find useful, and that will encourage you to use throughout your time in Mod 1 and going forward. We have another class on enumerables that will get into a little bit more detail on other enumerables. But for this class today, we're just going to go over map, find, and find all. And you also have some examples to do with each other as well to practice this. So learning goals, kind of like I just said, learn how to use and recreate the functionality of map, find all, and find using each. So what you'll notice is the structure that I kind of have for this lesson is go through how to do something using each, and then go back and refactor using a better use or a better case for an enumerable. And then that second bullet point there, understand when to use map, find all, and find appropriately. And then the last one there, we'll get to at the very end of just like how do you explore enumerables. I think some of you have already looked at Ruby docs and seen how to kind of like do some research on some of these better use enumerables, and we'll go over that if we have more time at the end, just to introduce you to that site if you haven't seen it yet. So kind of within those learning goals, actually we'll get to that part later. Let's go ahead and do this warm-up first. So 3 main points of this. If you have extra time, you're welcome to do this in code, but I mainly just want you to try this out in your notebook for right now. So first question, what is iteration and when do we use it? So if someone were to say that they are iterating through something, what does iterate mean? Or what is iteration? Even just like the noun of it, what is that? In your notebook, write the code that you would use to print each of the letters in this array. We're going to use the Kardashian dynasty in this example. So printing out each of those letters in there, you'll go ahead and kind of just like write in your notebook what the code would look like for that. And then in this third one here in your notebook, write the code that you would use to create a new array with capitalized versions of the following names. So here's a few Kardashians in here, and I want you to kind of think about and write down what you think your code would look like using an each to be able to go through that array and create a new one with capitalized versions of each of those names. So I'm going to put a timer up here. I think let's do, make this bigger. Let's do 5 minutes, and then I will check in just using the participants tab to see if we need some extra time on this. But I'll put that timer up here. And again, this is just on your own, no breakout groups. If you want to turn your camera off for this, you're more than welcome to.
I had a quick question about this.
Yep.
For the first one, are you looking for each of the individual letters to be printed on the same line or different lines?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
All right, just in the participants tab, if you all could give me a yes if you would like more time to do this in your notebook, or no if you've already completed it and do not need more time in your notebook. So yes if you need more time, no if you're ready to move on. If it's a no, it's like most people. Cool. All right, great. We will go ahead and let's move on. Let's go over this. I don't want to go over the whole thing. I think I want to just take a look at that last bullet point there. So can I get a volunteer just by the show hand feature in the participants tab of anyone that would like to walk me through how to implement this using each? Let's go with Sydney. Thanks for volunteering.
Okay. Okay, I was like, what was this, the name? So yeah, start with your original array. And then because each returns the original array, you need to have created an empty array for the.
Hold on one second. I just realized that when I copied that over, it did not like it. So let me fix this really quick. Okay. Oops. I think that looks better. There we go. Okay, ready. Go ahead, Sydney.
Okay. So you start with your original array. Because each returns the original array, you have to create an empty array for your method to go into.
Okay.
So I said capitalized names and set that equal to an empty array. And then I did on another line, I did names.each do. And then my block variable was name.
Okay.
And then on the next line, I told name.capitalize, and I shoveled that into capitalized name.
Gotcha. Okay. So in capitalized names, which was our empty array, you shoveled name.capitalize. Sorry.
And then ended that. And then I ask it to print capitalized names.
Cool. So print capitalized names then, just like that.
I just did a P, but yes.
Okay, cool. Yep, I think the P is for print. Either would work. Cool. Let's go ahead. Let's run this then. This is in my each file. Move this up a little bit. Cool. And each of those are getting capitalized now. Awesome. So thanks, Sydney. With each, just a reminder, the return value of each, like Sydney had said, is the original array, which is why we needed that placeholder up here. If we did not put this placeholder here, or we did not like explicitly print this out, and we said, let's go ahead and run this file, we get nothing printed out to the screen because we've never told it to print anything. Even here, if we said like print names, after we went through and we capitalized all of the names, we called name.capitalize, and we tried to print that, we're still getting that original array. So return value of that, still the original array, or I should say that within your each block, even if you do something to an element within your original array, it doesn't change it permanently. Same thing here, if I were to just like, maybe I save this into a variable and then said, let's print A. A then is essentially the return value of this whole each block, and each, like we mentioned already a few times, returns the original array. So even if I tried printing that, I would still get that original array. Aiden?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, do we have, since we're not using the Zoom chat anymore, do we have a place, are we gonna do like a Slack thing for that, or?
Do you have a question?
Since this is for the, in our retro, we decided that we would have a Slack channel for the Zoom chat instead of the actual Zoom chat, because it was too distracting. Do we have one of those, or should we make one or something?
Let me go ahead in your 28 backend code help. Is this kind of what you're talking about? Put a thread there for questions? Yeah, and if you have, so I just put that in the backend code help channel. Thanks for that reminder. And And I don't know what you all, I know Mike talked with you all a little bit about this, and I kind of had Mike on in the background a little bit when I was doing other things during the project kickoff. Is the consensus that we're not putting anything in the chat at all? Anyone answer that for me? Taylor?
I'm not sure that I had kind of posed the question, but I don't know that we came to like a definite conclusion on that yet though. So
Yeah. I think what I talked with Mike about this before I knew that he was going to address it, just as far as like what my stance on it is. And I think the chat is super helpful for when you all have questions related, like little clarifying questions here and there throughout the lesson, like, oh, what did Meg just say? Or can anyone remind me, like, what did she just run in order to get that? And so like those like quick little things I think are great for the chat. But when it gets to be like little inside jokes, which I love that y'all are funny and love joking around, I think we want to leave those out. If there's ever something that's like a question that is going to, you think kind of derail the class a little bit, and it's a question that isn't necessarily on topic, then or like it's something that you're a deeper wondering about the topic that we're talking about that you think would kind of derail the class, then I would put that in the thread in the Slack channel.
So would that be a good chat for what we would have right now?
I don't have your chat up.
It's in the actual Zoom chat right now.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for like things that relate directly to like right now in the Zoom.
Correct.
Versus
yeah, I think that would be great to just get that clarification in there.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I saw a few other hands up. Sydney, did you have your hand up, or did you just not take it down? Okay, you're good. Garrett, your hand's up. Was that just from volunteering earlier? Cool. Thanks.
No, I had an actual question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So here, right, we've used each, I guess, in a combination of like the global scope and a block scope. But for example, if we were to do this within a method, like if we were to be defining a method and have this be how we're defining that method, the P capitalized names, that would just go outside the block scope, but still in the method scope, right? And then you just call the method.
Yeah, you could do it a few different ways. I think you could call this capitalized name methods out here in global scope, and then in here, say print capitalized names.
Right, you'd call the method name in the global, and you put the capitalized names in the method scope, outside the block scope.
So let's try this. If I just run this now, oh, what did I do? Capitalized, spelled it wrong.
Yeah, exactly what you have there is what I would expect it to work. Oh no.
I just have a spelling issue somewhere, I think, or name. Yeah, this would also have to come in here too, or I'd have to pass it in. You see how that's having its issue with names?
Sorry, I didn't even look at that piece. Yeah, that would have to be defined within the method.
Yeah, and then if I try this.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I like this idea of keeping it in a method. That's totally fine. And if you did use a method, you could do it like this. All right. So kind of going back to just like what we've already talked about with each and going forward with other enumerables, there's three main parts that I want to talk about when we're talking about different enumerables and the things that you should be looking at when you are doing some research on other enumerables. And one, syntax, obviously you have to know kind of like how to write it in order to get it to work. Two, return values. And three, best use cases. So second and third, super important when it comes to deciding which enumerable that you want to use for a specific case. Thinking about, okay, well, what does a certain enumerable return to me? Does it return, in each case, it returns the original array. In other cases, maybe it just returns one specific value. Maybe it returns multiple elements that reach it or that meet a certain condition. And then when you decide like those return values after looking at that, that's when you can look into, okay, well, which return value would be best for this case that I'm trying to accomplish right now. So with each, that's kind of like the syntax that we have here, collection.each do, we iterate over something, and there's a block of code that that we perform within that do and end. And the return of an each is the original array, as we've talked about. And best use case for this, I wrote here, when iterating over a collection and there is not an enumerable that specifically accomplishes this goal. So there's not a better enumerable. So now's when we'll start talking about those better enumerables. And I wanna look first at map, which is one that I've seen a few people use already. I think I even mentioned it in the review that I had done on Friday for the independent challenge. And with map, it works very similar to, or this would be like a great scenario, I should say, to use map for, because map pretty much does all of this without needing to have a placeholder to be able to shovel something into. So in the case of map, instead of using each, I'm going to use a map. And again, map does not require a placeholder. So I'm going to get rid of this placeholder here. And let me actually, I think I'm going to take this all out of a method for right now, just to kind of play with the basics here. All right, so I have names. I'm saying names.mapDo. Again, I don't have that placeholder anymore, so I don't need to shovel anything in. And I'm just saying for every name that was in this names array, capitalize that name. So map's return value is the altered array, but it does not change the original array. Again, it returns an altered array, but it does not change the original array. So in order to print it out though, actually, I guess I could, yeah, let's do this. Just save it into a variable here and call this capitalized names. Line this up. And then print out capitalized names. Let's go ahead and run this. And we still get that same output that we were expecting. With a method, so if I went back to that idea of like, okay, let's put this into a method now. So let's call this method capitalized names. Let's pull that names into this method so it at least knows what that is. Oops. And we'll pull this up into the method. So here, since the return value of every method is that last line, essentially the last line here is this block. Remember, we can write this without the do in the end. We can write it on one line with the curly brackets. So this is essentially that last line. So if I print out this method like this, let's try this now. I'm getting that return value of whatever that last line was. I saw a few hands come up. Jake, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's kind of a general question on what you said a minute ago. So do most enumerables not alter the original array? Is that pretty standard?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
It just allows you to check something in an array, or I kind of like to think of it as making an altered copy of it.
Okay.
Yeah. If I, let's say, let me actually put a pry in here. And let's go ahead and run this again. So now that I've we take a look here, I went through names, I capitalized each name. The return value of this line here was the actual capitalized collection of those names. But right now, think to yourself, what's going to happen when I hit enter on names? What's going to get returned to me? Sydney, I heard you, or I saw you mouth something to yourself. What'd you say?
I think it will do the original array.
Cool. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. Nice. So it didn't actually change that original array, but doing this map through it, like I said, I kind of like to think of it as like making a copy, an altered copy of it and returning that, but it doesn't change the original. Aiden, question?
Yeah, so two actually. If you did capitalize bang, is that a method? in Ruby, and does it alter the original array?
Yes.
Yes. And second, there is another way to do this thing. You can in the and colon syntax.
Yeah, if you all want to take a look at that syntax, you're welcome to. There's a few different ways to write this. I think the most common ways that I see are with the curly brackets or with the do in the end. But Aiden, if you want to drop an example in the chat of kind of what you're talking about for a different syntax that you can use, you're welcome to do that. I would say that syntax that you're about to drop though, Aiden, I would only use it if it's a very simple task that you need to do to a collection, because it can get pretty confusing.
Since this is just capitalize.
Yeah, and as far as
that's what it looks like.
Aiden had mentioned, what if we put this bang on here? That bang will alter, obviously we just saw that, it will alter the original array. That's something to be careful of. I would very infrequently use a bang, because it's likely that maybe later on in your code you needed to go back to the original and now you just changed it. So if you ever wanted to keep it the way it was, don't use a bang. Cool. Let's do one other example. Let's say I wanted to, and let me get rid of this just really quick. Again, I just changed the syntax up on you and just want to make sure that this still works. Of course, I still have the pry in there. There you go, cool. So again, that's doing the end, we can replace with those curly brackets. I think this is fine to do as long as you're consistent with the way that you write it. Sometimes I think it gets a little confusing if sometimes you use do end and sometimes you use the curly brackets. And also, again, if it goes past this 80 character line, as far as that Ruby convention goes, I would be wary to do these curly brackets. Try not to get it to be a very long line. Okay, let's do one other example. Let's say that I wanted to I wanted this, instead of capitalized names, I wanted to return like the length of every name. So in this case, let's call length of every name. And I want to map through the names. I like the do and the end, so I'm just going to do it like this. And for every single name, I don't want it to return the original string. I just want it to return the number of characters that are in that string. So a method I can use for that is length, name.length, to return how many characters are in that string. And let's go ahead and run this. Cool. Great. All right. I want you all to keep that in your head. I want to give you a 5-minute break, and then when you come back, I'm going to put you in breakout groups to try this out with some other examples. Okay. I'll go ahead and put a timer up here. Be back by the time it hits 0.
Hey, May, I had a question if I can while we're on break.
I think she's gone.
Ah.
Who had that question? I'm here. That's a consolation prize. Well, now you're gone, so. Oh.
No, I'm here. I have like 2 monitors and I have a slow mouse wheel, so I'm like, awesome. So my question is about using like assigning, for example, here where we do names.map, do name.length, and assigning like an instance variable to the new array that's been created. Like we want to keep the old array as the original array, but later on in the program, it'd be useful to be able to use this new array output.
Yeah.
you assign the instance variable, like if you do at, call it, at length.
Let me pause you right there. Like I see what you're saying, but I think that like in general, we want to be a little lean with how often we use instance variables because they're pretty computationally expensive. I would rather have a method that just that just capitalizes everything every single time it needs to, rather than storing that permanently in a thing.
And then just call the method each time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
Because the idea is that like when we create objects, if you have it set to an instance variable all the time, like that's always being used. But there are instances where like maybe we use the thing and we never have to figure out the capitalized names for whatever reason. Right. So it's I think that again, it depends on use case, but for most instances, most times, that is on average, it's a more of a win to just have it calculate that.
Makes sense. Okay, appreciate it.
Yeah, and another reason why we don't want to modify the original collection is that if something goes wrong and you have a lot of different things that are modifying the same kind of collection, if one of them doesn't modify it correctly, like which one did it, which one do you have to fix? Like that becomes, it can become very kind of like needle in a haystack to debug.
I guess ultimately, like if you really wanted to do this, you could just use a bang here and it would accomplish similar goal to if we had created an instance variable, but now we can just
but again, avoid doing that because we want to be, in general, we want to be non-destructive it'll just you'll tear your hair out less later on if you do that.
Yep, I just want to make sure I was understanding. Mm-hmm.
All right, so I just dropped, no, I didn't. I had to press enter. There you go. This is in your Slack channel right now, this map practice. And so in a second, I'm going to put you into groups of 2. So when you get into those groups of 2, have one person share their screen and one person can, I don't mind if you both kind of like talk through it, just have one person sharing their screen to walk through these 4 steps. So here's a collection that I want you to use, this array of numbers. And this first one here says, use each to return an array with every element in the numbers array doubled. So you should get back 10, 2, 26, 4, so on. Second one here, refactor the code you implemented for number 1 above to use map instead of each. So first I want you to do all of this with each first, and then I want you to refactor it to use map, just like I kind of showed for you all first. Second, or third one, I guess, second set of practice. Use each to return true if the element is even, and return false if the element is odd. And so again, creating a new array for that, I didn't write that in this part here, but return a new array with true in place of the element that's even and false in place of the element that's odd. And then again, do the same thing you did in number 3, but this time using math. Any questions on what I want y'all to do in these breakout rooms? When your group is done with this, when you've gone through all 4 of these, if you can do the same thing that you did before of just putting that emoji check mark on, I'll put it on here, on this Slack thread here. So I'll just put it on now. So if you can just go ahead and emoji that, someone in your group, just one person in your group, emoji that map practice with the check mark so that I know that your group is done and I can get a good idea of when to pull everyone back. All right? Okay, here you go. And I guess to wrap this part up here, I wanted to jump over to the slide here for the syntax returns and the best use case for map. So with the syntax for it, very similar to that each. Only thing here is we don't need a placeholder anymore. Returns for map, whatever we do in the block. So whatever you do in that block is going to be what you get returned to you from that array that you've altered. And then I put this note here that, again, this does not change the original array, just gives back an altered copy of it. And then the best use case, this right here is kind of the key indicator to me, is when I am trying to alter an array yet still get back the same size as the original array. That's when I think I should use map. So when original array is the same size as the desired array, that kind of indicates to me that, okay, I'm just going through every single element and changing something about every single one. Any questions that came up in your group while y'all were working through that? Okay. The next one that I want to go over is find. And let me pull up this example over here. So I'm still going to keep going with my example with the Kardashians. You all keep going with your number examples. But for this one, I want to do these 2 things with y'all. So the first one here, find the first name greater with, or sorry, first name, there you go, I didn't write this right. First name length greater than 4. I should write this a little different. Find first name with length greater than 4. That sounds right to me. Okay. So greater than 4, if I'm looking at this collection here, the first name with a length greater than 4 is going to be Courtney. So that's what I want to get returned to me. And I just want to get that string returned to me. I don't care if I'm just getting one thing back. I don't want it to come back in an array. I just want to get that element returned to me. So I want to do this first using each. So I'm going to start with names.eachDo, and I'm going to go through each of those as a name. And anytime that I'm using each, and I want to get some type of return from that iteration, I'm going to use a placeholder. In this case, my return value that I want, I just want it to be a string. So I think there's a few different things that we could do here. I think that for this placeholder, I could, let's call it first name greater than 4, long name there. And I could set it to nil. I could just have a variable, have it be empty. I could set it as an empty string. I just think I need to have some type of variable here to be able to override once I get to my each. Jake, did you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick on naming convention. Is it always better to type out a number?
I don't know. I don't know an answer to that. I think you could do either way. I see some people use the number, some don't. Either's fine. I think the only naming convention when it comes to numbers is don't start with a number. Start with a word. Silly little convention, but I think it's fine if you'd use a number or a letter or the letters for it, the word for it. Cool. So I want to go through each of these names, and whenever I find one that has a length greater than 4, I want to return that element. I want to return that string. So I think I'm going to have a conditional here and say, if the name's length is greater than 4, then I want the first name greater than 4 to equal that name. And then I guess I don't really need an else. I think I can just leave it at that. I can just say, if this name is greater than 4, then go ahead and redefine what this first name greater than 4 is. The only issue I'm seeing right now is, let's do this. Let's go through with it and let's see if y'all can figure out kind of what this issue is here. So now that I've gone through it, I've assigned a name that has a length greater than 4 to this variable up here. I've overwritten it. And now down here, if I want to print that out, I can go ahead and say first name greater than 4. Let's go ahead and run this. I'm running my find, and I'm getting Kylie. I want y'all to think to yourselves, look at my code here. Why am I getting Kylie and not Courtney? And if you figured it out, start thinking about like how could I maybe go about fixing this? If you think you have an idea of how to fix it, or even what's wrong, go ahead and raise your hand. You, Jen?
Because you're reassigning first name greater than 4 for every element in the array. It's doing it, since the last element is longer than 4, it's assigning it to that.
Yeah, awesome. Do you have an idea how to fix it?
You could stick a return in there so it pops out wherever the first one pops up.
Like this?
Yes. Just return name, I think.
Return instead of this.
Instead of first name greater than.
Cool. Let's try it.
Oh, I mean, you'll have to print it out, but I guess, yeah, so you would need to assign it to something.
Yeah, I think I like this idea of returning it. If this were in a method and we printed out that method, this would definitely work. But since we're not in a method, it's not working quite that way. But I like this idea of like, okay, we're going to need something that takes us out of this if block. Any ideas? Has anyone worked with this and has a clue what they could put in here? Joshua?
Could you use break? I'm not as familiar with that.
Yeah, let's take a look. There you go. Nice. Yeah, so break, what break does is it takes you out of that conditional, or it takes you out of that iteration, I should say, from this each iteration. It breaks you out of it as soon as you hit this word break. So what this is pretty much doing, I think this is a great way to do this. What this is pretty much doing is it's saying, the first one it gets is Chris, right? So it's saying Chris's length is 4, that's not greater than 4. So it doesn't do anything here. Then it goes to Kim, Kim's length is 3, doesn't do anything here. Then it goes to the next one, Courtney, Courtney's length is greater than 4. So we go in here, we reassign this variable first name greater than 4 to be the string of Courtney. And then it hits this break, which pops it out of the each, and it doesn't even go on to the next one. So it's only returning that very first one. Nice, I like that. A few hands up. Connor.
Sorry, no, that's supposed to be down. I don't have a question.
Okay, John.
Not so much as a question, but could I build an empty array or placeholder as an empty array, shovel the names greater than 4 into it, and then just call dot first on the array?
Yes. Yeah, and you definitely can do that. I think the thing with this though, John, is what do you want as your return value? In the first place, you just want it to be a string. So why save it into a variable if you really only want the actual element to come back to you?
Got it.
Okay, but yeah, that will still work. But if you only want one element back, you don't need to save it into a data type that you're just going to take it out of eventually. Jake, question?
Yeah, so actually two-part question after what John just said.
Uh-huh.
So would that return the same thing with or without the first because of the break, or?
You mean if we take that off there?
Yeah, because isn't it still going to break out of there? Okay.
It's still, since we're shoveling it in, this is the data type that it's getting put into. So it's getting saved within that data type.
Okay, and then just stopping once it hits the first one.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that break is essentially going to like through two levels because it's breaking out of the if statement and breaking out of the each.
Correct.
Okay, that's how breaks will always work? They'll kind of break out of everything?
Yeah, well, I would think of it mainly as breaking out of that iteration.
Okay.
And yeah, if there was any other code under here, it wouldn't even get to this if it hit that break.
Okay.
But the main point of it, I would say, is to break out of an iteration. Garrett?
Yeah, so going back to what was originally posed with return, like, so why doesn't return work here? I feel that would have been my intuitive way of doing this, would have been to use return.
Yeah, thanks for bringing us back to that. So let's say we made a method for this. Let's make length greater than 4. We'll go ahead and pull this in. Let's pull everything else in. Okay, so now everything's in a method. Let's kind of walk through this, make sure that I have everything named. Oops, named appropriately. This is the name I'm using. That is not the name I'm using. There you go. So length greater than 4, we have this placeholder. Let's say here it's nil. In the case of the return, what we were saying here is if the name length is greater than 4, let's just return that name. And then let's print out that method. So let's go ahead and let's run this. Let's see what this does. Names. I keep forgetting to pull this in too. There you go. And we are getting that Courtney back here. So with that return, this return is working in the, back up. In this case, we wouldn't actually even need this placeholder because as soon as we hit this return, it kind of acts like a break, but for a method. So it automatically returns that value for that method. And so since we called a method and the return value was this name, we're saying here, print out that return value.
So is that just like a fundamental aspect of how return works, that it specifically works within methods and not outside of methods? Or is there a particular reason why it does work within the method, but not like in the just block global scope?
Yeah, that's a great question. My understanding is that it is just going to work within that method. So it's specifically for what a method would return. And that's why it wasn't working before. Great question. I'm going to go back to how I had this before. Again, just taking it out of that, method just for now. And I want to take a look at how would we use find for this. Some of you may have seen another kind of like alias for find. So find also could be find, or I believe it's detect. Those are interchangeable. You could use either, whatever sounds best to you. But what find or detect does is it finds and returns the first element that matches a certain condition. And that certain condition is a condition that is written within your block. So in this case, and again, with all of these enumerables that we're going over today, it eliminates this need for a placeholder. So I can get rid of this placeholder here. And instead of each, I'm going to use find. And so I want to, and within this block, again, within this like do and end, I want to have some type of condition so that I can evaluate each element that gets passed in through this block. So for each name, I want to see, is that name length greater than 4? And as soon as the condition that's in this block evaluates to true, it's going to take that element and return that element. So to show this, let me go ahead and put this into a variable here, and then we'll put it back into a method. Let's say this is the variable for it. We have our names. Good. We're getting that Courtney returned to us. If I put this into a method, that kind of eliminates this need here with that variable name. And let's say in here, for my method, I call this first name greater than 4. Again, we pull this into here as well. Since again, this is technically the return value, since this is technically on one line, right? With those curly brackets, you could write it on one line. The return value is going to be whatever this block evaluates to. So it's going to return, again, returns the first element, just one element that evaluates to true using this condition within the block. So let's go ahead and run this. And I still get that Courtney. Questions on this? Let's take a look at the second example before I give you all a break and send you off on another practice. So the second one here I have is find first Kardashian that's name doesn't start with K. So we do only have one, but still it's only going to return one using this find. So let's go ahead and change this up a little bit, and let's say first name not starting with K. Cool. And I have my names here. And I'm going to do this with each first, just like y'all have been doing. So names.each do, I have a name. And since I'm using each, I'm going to need a placeholder here. Let's just call it name not with K. And I'll just set that to nil. I guess I could use the return value variable too. A few different ways we could do it. So names.each do for this name, if the name, I guess the first character in it, so indexed at 0. And I think just to do a little edge case, throw a little edge case into here and to account for that, I'm going to put upcase. Go ahead and just upcase this. So if that first character upcased is equal to K, that way I can make sure if it came in capitalized already or if it came in lowercase for any reason, I'm upcasing it just to make sure, is that what it came out to be? So if it came out to be K, and actually I'm thinking back here, the first one that is not K. So if the first character is not equal to K, then I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this name not with K is equal to name. And I'm going to use that return. I've been mixing this up, sorry y'all. Return name. I just went all over the place in that. Let me walk through this again. First name not starting with K, we call first name not starting with K. We have our names here. We're going through each name. And if the first character in that name, when I upcase it, if it's not equal to K, then I want to go ahead and just return that name. And so I'm printing out the return value of that method. Go ahead and run this. And I get Rob. Cool. Again, with find, I can go ahead and just do this find here. And I don't need to explicitly return it. Whatever element returns true, evaluates to true for this condition in here, will get returned for me. And I'm getting Rob still. any questions on this example or other examples that we've done so far? Let's go and do 5 minutes. If y'all find any questions during that time, we can answer them when you come back, and then I'll put you into breakout groups to try this on your own too. See y'all then. Any questions that come up during that break that I can help answer? Garrett?
Yeah, I just had 2 questions that are more like clarifying questions. So I might have just missed this. Why do we set it to nil and not 0? I mean, it kind of like I have some ideas, but yeah, I'm not like.
Honestly, if you're gonna override it, it could have been anything. I think with the edge case though, like if something were to go wrong and someone's expecting to get a name back or a letter back or something back, then what would you like them to see? It could have been a string that said, can't find that name or something like that, which maybe would have been a better,
Gotcha. I see.
case. Yeah, but I just had it set to anything in that case.
Or it could have been 0. It didn't really matter. Okay. And then the second question was just, so setting it to where we have the if name element 0 dot uppercase not equal to capital K. The capital K catches both lower and uppercase. Is that
correct?
Okay.
Yep.
I'll make sure.
Good questions. All right. Well, I went ahead and I dropped a link to the practice that I want you to work with your pair. I switched around groups a little bit. You should be with a different person. If you're not, I guess the randomization in here isn't great, but I'm going to go ahead and open up those groups. Same process as last time. One person share your screen, and once you're done, go ahead and just emoji check so I can see that we're ready to move on. Oh, did you find yours? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead. I want to jump back to this little conclusion here. So for find, again, syntax, very similar to everything that we've been doing so far. Just got to throw that word find in instead of each or map or whatever it might be. Again, you also do not need a placeholder for find. Return values from find is the first element that matches a condition. I might also add here, it doesn't come in an array. It truly is that first element. So not wrapped in an array, you shouldn't have to call dot first on it. It's that one element that first evaluates to true from that block. And the best use case for this, searching collection for first element that matches a certain condition. So when you just want the first instance or the first element that evaluates to true, then you would use a find. If you're looking for a collection to come back to you, that's when you would use that find all. Garrett?
Yeah, so my partner and I, we were working through this. When we set a variable equal to, oh sorry, for the the numbers dot find and getting finding the only number, the first number that has a remainder of 0 when divided by 3. So we did numbers dot find, and then we did number little %3, and it works. And then if we set a variable equal to that, we can get it to print to the screen. But if we don't set a variable equal to it, nothing prints. We're not able to return print the return value.
Right.
And we just couldn't figure out
That's
why.
without it being in a method. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So in that case, the return value, you need to specifically say what to print to the screen. It works when we just call a method and we say print this method, because that's pretty much saying print the return value. So in order for yours to work, you have to save it into a variable so that you could say, hey, print this.
Sorry, this is within a method. So within the method, we're doing numbers.find, do number %3 equals 0, and then we end, and then we call the method afterwards, and nothing prints to the screen. The program just processes, and I assume the return value is saved. But yeah, it was just confusing both of us. And
let's do this just so we can make sure that we get to find all. If Garrett, can you copy that code that you're talking about that wasn't working for you, and can you put it in the Slack thread? Totally. And I'll just take a look at it later and comment back on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. All right, let's take a look at this last one that I want to go over. I just mentioned find all. And so I have a few examples. I want to go over these examples first, then I'll give you a break, and then we'll do the last group together, okay? So again, working with the Kardashians, I want to find all the Kardashians that's names start with K. And I think this is a common one that we've used each when we could have used find all in the past. So again, let's start with that each. Let's say names.each do. And for each name that I have, if it has a length greater than or equal to 4, then I want to keep track of that. I want to hold on to it. I want to return that with the collection. So in order to return a collection using each, I do need to have this placeholder. So I'm going to say here, names greater than 4, have it be an empty array since I want to return a collection. And in here, if the name's length is greater than or equal to 4, sorry, less than, I'm reading this wrong. I guess I'm doing this one first. I feel like I'm all over the place right now. Find all the Kardashians with a name less than or equal to 4. Let me switch this up. Less than or equal to 4. Then I want to push that into the names greater than 4 array and return that array. So names greater than 4 array. Let's go ahead then and push that name into that array. And I don't want to put a break in here because I want to go through every single element, and I want to look at every single element and decide, is that element's length less than or equal to 4? And if so, put it into this collection that I'm going to return later. So I'm not putting a break in. I'm just shoveling everything in that has that condition evaluate to true. And then once I'm done here, once I'm done pushing those into that array, I can go here and say print names greater than 4. And this is in, what do I have this in? Let me put this in my find all file. Maybe I should rename this. Names. A little bit more representative there. So names less or equal to 4. And this works with that each. See a few hands. Will.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is how did you just change the names of less than or equal to 4 with like some keyboard command there really quickly?
Yeah, I just selected
Awesome.
1 and then Command D. This works if you, I'm assuming it works in other text editors, but at least in Atom this works. Command D will highlight it wherever it is. So then I can go through it and change it on every single one.
That's awesome. Cool. The other question is, what's the difference between select and find all?
Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. So select and find all is just like how find and detect can be interchangeable, and just like how map and collect can be interchangeable. They were just named differently at different points of Ruby, but they both still work.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Jake?
Okay.
Go ahead, Jake. Oh, you're muted.
I think all right. Good?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I read somewhere that if you're using select on a hash, it will return a hash, but find all will not.
I am not entirely sure. I'd have to try that out a little bit. I think let's icebox that. Let's put that away for a bit, just since we haven't talked about hashes yet. Okay. And if you want to, Jake, if you want to put that into that Slack thread, that would be a great place for that question. And then I'll do some of my own research as well. Sage?
Yeah, another keyboard shortcut question. Which one were you using to move the whole line?
Control, Command, and then arrows. So if you hold Control, Command down, you can move it around.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So with find all, again, we don't have this need for a placeholder anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that and change this each for a find all. And find all and or select, what it does is it returns all of the elements that evaluate to true for a certain condition in the block. So in our case here, the condition that we're talking about is that name length greater than equal to 4. So I want to find all of the names with a length less than or equal to 4. And I want that to print out to the screen. So let's go ahead and just save this into a variable so we can actually see it. And then run this file. And we still get that return value. If I put this into a method, let's go ahead and name it that same thing and just move these around. Okay, so we have our names, and I want to say here, names, find all of the names with a length less than or equal to 4. And I just say print the return value of that method, so print out that method. Run this. And I'm still getting that same return value that I want. Sage, did you still have a question? No, okay. There you go. Cool, questions on this? All right, last example that I want to do all together, I'm just going to jump right to doing it with the find all. So find all of the Kardashians that's names start with K. So let me just rename these names starting with K. Again, I don't need a placeholder, but I just rename my method there. So I want to find all of the names where the names, and I guess I can kind of take that syntax that I used before. That first character, maybe I upcase it just to make sure that doesn't matter how it's written in my array. So the first character in each of those elements is equal to K, is what I want to check. And we get only names that start with K. Rob was removed from that collection. Let's go ahead, let's do a 5-minute break again. This will be the last break, and then we'll go ahead and give you some time to practice this again with a new partner, and we'll end it there and hopefully get 5 minutes before I send you off for PD. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap this up. So with that find all, again, coming back to this kind of conclusion screen here. So syntax for it, just using that find all method, that enumerable. The return values for this returns all elements that match a certain condition. And best use cases for find all is when you want to find all elements that match a certain condition. Those kind of go hand in hand when you want that return value. Any questions on find all or anything that's come up during these 2 hours? The main thing that I want you all to come away with today, see a few hands come up. The main thing I want you all to come away with today is being able to answer this question here. So if you feel comfortable with what they return and also those like best use cases that we went over with, I would say you kind of got this, but I would also say make sure that when we wrap up here that you go back and you make sure to write down for all 3 enumerables that we have, what were those return values and what were those best use cases. When we're done here and when we wrap this up, I'll go ahead and I'll share, I'm sorry I didn't do this beforehand, I'll share these slides with you which do have those written down, so you have access to them there. But I would just make sure that you all make a little note to yourselves on what are those best use cases and those return values for these enumerables. Garrett, I think I saw you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
I did, but I think I could put it in the Slack channel.
Okay, cool. Lastly, there was one piece of the learning target that I mentioned I would kind of give you all at the end, and that was just a place to be able to do some of your own research. So I'm going to drop Ruby docs. Ruby, hold on one second, 2.5.3 docs for enumerables in your channel. This last slide that I had here was just kind of challenging you all to kind of do some of your own research on some of these enums. These are a few that we'll go over later on in the mod, but if you want to take note of those now and do some of your own research with those Ruby docs that I just put into your channel, I just linked in there, you're more than welcome to kind of get a little head start on some other great use enums and do some research on that. All right, y'all. I want to make sure that I give y'all enough time to take a break before PD starts. Lita just posted the Zoom link as well as the lesson plan and materials that you'll need for that in your channel. So let's go ahead, let's sign off from this. I'll drop the slides in your channel as well so you have access to those. Sign off from this and be on Lita's call at 3 o'clock. I'll see y'all then. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Yes, you're welcome.